Welcome, gamers, to this week's episode of LastCallGaming. We're on episode number 168. Today is May 8th. My name is Craig Perales. Joining me, Mandrew Montemayor. We've been talking a whole bunch about some Star Wars, and we'll get into that, but I didn't even ask you, how was your day, my friend?
It was good. I'm finally feeling like I'm not tired. I felt like I slept like all weekend.
Like you're like Game of Thrones. I'm not tired!
Yeah. I felt like I really, for whatever reason this weekend, I just took a bunch of random naps, and I'm feeling much better this week than last time.
Yeah, I didn't really do much. I didn't really get much gaming done this week, and I pretty much just... and I'll talk about some of the things I watched, but I just kind of had a nice, chill, relax, hang out with me and D'Angelo. We're hanging out, we're watching some shows. I've been wanting to start watching Better Call Saul, because I know one of the newer seasons is on Netflix now, and it's one of the few shows we watch together, so I was like, alright, we gotta start doing that.
I'm still just trying to burn through. I'm at like the end of season 10, maybe start of season 11 of Big Bang, so I'm like right at the end. I'm like, dude, thank God, so I can watch something. As much as I love the show, I'm just ready to watch something else.
Nice, excellent. So guys, if you're joining us on the YouTube show, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, hit that share button, hit that notification bell. If you guys are interested in following us on any of our social media, our Linktree link is in the description of this video. And if you guys are listening to the audio-only version of this podcast, you can check all of our podcast episodes on any of the podcast platforms of your choice. So, before we dive into our main topics, Andrew and I like to do, what are you up to? We take a second, talk about what we've been playing, what we've been watching. But since you haven't watched anything new, and I kind of want to talk on the same thing of what we've played, I'll just start off by what I've watched this week first. And I watched a couple different things, but one of the things that stood out to me was, and I've been meaning to watch this forever, like I told you earlier, Denny was over, and we had the same conversation we always had. He's like, have you watched Justice League Dark Apocalypse War yet? And I was like, no, not yet. So... that's what I watched. I watched Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. It's on movie. Yeah, it's on HBO Max. It came out May 20th, 2020. It's actually a direct sequel to Justice League Dark. It's pretty cool because it pretty much focuses around Constantine. Now, what I didn't know is that it's the 16th installment of that kind of new 52 kind of
their animated
DC
universe
that they made.
Yeah.
But it actually this is the official ending of it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird because in most of these things, it's either... if you're like DC and the MCU, you either get rebooted or you're like the MCU, you just keep going and going. So what I gotta say is, and I won't give any spoilers, but so I actually watched Dark because I know I've seen Dark before, but I'm like, let me get re-familiar. So I watched Dark, and then right after that, I watched Dark Apocalypse War. And I gotta say, it's dark, it's sinister, and I mean the fact that you get to see these people kind of mutilated, the way that they end up getting mutilated is pretty nonsense. You get to see kind of what the full power of Darkseid is, and I just want to say, because it's pretty much the premise of the movie, I don't think it's a big spoiler, it's pretty much looking at the point of what happens when Darkseid wins. What do you do when one of the biggest, new gods that's just nothing but power and destruction wins? What does the world look like? What happens to the Justice League after that? So the storyline, I think, is amazing, and I gotta say, what they show on Constantine, because I've watched a little bit of, like, he pops up in Arrow, and I know he had his own show, and he has a couple different movies, but Constantine's pretty badass. I never read too many of his comics to know exactly how kind of, because when you think of big magic users, you think of, like, Dr. Fate, you think of Zatanna and stuff. Constantine was doing a bunch of stuff where I'm like, dude, it looks like he could handle a whole squad on his own, so... I ended up really liking the movie, but you said you've seen it, so you agree with me? Is it obviously we like Flashpoint Paradox and stuff, but after watching that, I'm like, this one's up there, but it's kind of a tough watch.
Yeah, no, I actually really enjoyed this one too. Yeah, it is a lot darker than a lot of the other ones,
a little more dark side
because I wonder almost if they, I don't want to say took like a page. I can't remember if this came out before or after Injustice, and maybe that's why they felt maybe a little bit, because you don't really see besides War. I guess War gets in there too, but I felt like this is a little more graphic than War.
Justice League War is like in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because Injustice has nothing to do with this new 52.
Yeah, no, I know, but I meant with how brutal Injustice is.
Gotcha.
And because they also do like the Mortal Kombat movies kind of under the same umbrella, they're like, okay, we've already kind of shown this kind of brutality to people. Like, let's just put it in this because that is the way that it would be that makes sense. And I'm like, okay, cool, I'm all for this. Because it's not like it's senseless violence or something.
If I'm not mistaken, I think it's one of the only two movies movies out of that little DCEU that's rated R.
I forget what it's called. It's not DCU. It's like I forget what it is.
Yeah, whatever the animated.
I think it's DCAU or something.
And one of the cool things is that at the very end, it does have a very comic book type ending.
Yeah.
So that ending, I was just like, okay, cool.
I haven't seen any of the new ones. I was kind of looking some of them up because I think there's been like 3 or 4 movies that have come out since then. I'm like, okay, I think these ones now are like continuing a version of what that was. I'm like, I don't know if they really kind of like strike me from what I've seen so far. I'm like, they don't seem like that interesting.
Yeah, I think they're a little off because the one I think I talked about in the show, the other one I saw was the Battle of the Super Sons, which it seems kind of like the same Batman and maybe Damian, but it's definitely not the same Superman. So yeah, there are some new ones. But anyway, that's what I've been watching. As far as what we've been playing, I did want to take some time because we both at this point have beaten Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I know last time Andrew wasn't that far. I was kind of a little salty where I'm like, this game isn't hitting me in the Star Wars notes that I want. It's so weird because right after we did that episode and I started playing, I hit the pivotal point where you're just like, dude, this is completely Star Wars. So I don't know if it launched to a point where I'm like, this is good. I mean, it might be my top 5, but I don't know if it'd be my game of the year by any means. But because it took so long to kind of get to the point where it just kind of blows up. But it did get very exciting very quickly after that. But I just kind of want to put some time on your thoughts since you didn't really dive too much into it. Now that you finished it, everything you thought, worthy success for Fallen Order?
For sure. I see it in the comments too. I'm like, man, I kind of almost wish that they would have, like, this had been the new trilogy of movies we got, was this story on the big screen. Because it's so much better than what we got with, like, Rey and her journey. I'm like, man, dude, this is so good. I'm enjoying this so much more. And what's weird too is that this is taking place during that moment we hate. Like, we're always talking about, like, get out of this Luke Skywalker era, out of, that whole section of the timeline.
The 20 years where it's still between Vader and all these other different people.
We've been harping about it nonstop. Like, let's get out of here. Let's do something else. But this is just done so much better. I'm like, okay, if you're going to do it, this is the way that it needs to be done. I understand what you were talking about, though, with, like, later on. So the story kind of, I feel like it takes off and it's really good. But then you have to do like a lot of traveling. And there is a lot of points where I'm like, man, dude, I'm running around and I could see something like right here across from me. And I'm like, dude, I already know I'm going to have to do all this stuff and then that's going to be the shortcut. Yeah. Like, I'm already using a blaster on all these newfangled gadgets. Like, why didn't Kyle just get a fucking jetpack? It'd be so much easier.
I was thinking it the whole time, man.
But I love the game, especially once it took off towards the end. I thought it was super amazing, super happy with the ending. I can't wait to see what the next one's going to be in store. My only big problem is, like I was saying before, is I did have lots of errors with, like, stuff popping in or it not running, like, really well and it being super, like, janky. And it seemed to me like after they did the day that we had recorded this last week was the day, I think it was either that day or the next day, they were putting out the patch that was supposed to make the game run better. I felt like mine read a lot worse after that. Infinitely worse. I could notice it. I'm like, dude, this doesn't make sense. I thought it was supposed to run a lot better. Like, it seemed like my
dark side.
Yeah, it seemed like my game was running a lot worse. So again, I think that's the only thing that really kind of kept it from me from being that 9 is I'm like, dude, like, this is just kind of especially too because especially later in the game, like how we were talking about where you have these powers, so it is your main means of traversal. There's a lot of precise jumps and stuff that you'd have to make that I'm climbing up something or doing the precise jump, but because the game hiccups or loads wrong or something like that, I die, and then now I have to redo that whole part. Or there's sometimes where I had to do a part like 3 or 4, like I'm climbing this thing that's like spinning in a circle, and you're obviously not supposed to touch like the hard parts. It's just smooth, it doesn't kill you, but like there's nowhere for him to grab, so you would naturally fall. I'm not even coming near that stuff. There's way too much room between me and that, and he would just let go of what I'm holding onto for some reason and fall and die, and then I have to do it again. And I'm like, good thing the game loads really fast, because otherwise this would piss me off. But I'm like, dude, I've been stuck here for like 2 minutes because I keep doing the same damn thing.
The other thing because I thought you were going to say this, that when the day or two after we recorded, the game instantly went on sale $10 cheaper.
Did it?
Yeah, so I think Benny was telling me that too, and I had to look it up. Like, no way, this game is out for less than a week and it's already on sale. And I don't think it needed to be. I don't think there was enough problems, especially after the day 2 patch that would have required it to drop $10. Especially when some other games we might talk about definitely would have maybe needed something like that. But I was gonna say, did you end up like what force powers were you using, and did you end up using more of the other stances? That was the Kylo Ren saber and the blaster technique.
No, I didn't use the blaster one too much. I used it, but I kind of didn't like it. I ended up switching.
Once I started using that one, that's pretty much all I was using.
I ended up switching from Darth Maul's stance to the double blade, having the one in each hand, and then I did go with Kylo Ren's. Okay. And I was using.
Dude, that's a nicer power swinger.
Dude, it just smashes bosses. I was really primarily using that on stronger enemies. I didn't use too many of the force abilities. The only one I was really using was either force push, or one of my favorite things too is just force pulling someone to me, because it's got a good animation. Yeah, you pull him towards you, and at the same time he stabs them and just puts them down. And I'm like, man, dude, that just looks so cool every time you do it. Force push and pull were my two big ones.
I ended up upgrading the confusion one all the way up to where at the end you could start doing it on big beast. And I would use that a lot too, just kind of run around. It was more like, I didn't really need it, but it was kind of more fun to watch these guys just like beat the shit out of each other while I'm just kind of kicking back, firing my little blaster at them.
Oh, I was going to say too, I almost kind of cheesed the game in a way, because I feel like, because the first thing I upgraded, because I stacked my points, because I didn't want to know what I would get into, I ended up going all the way on the slowdown ability. So I would do that on like a boss, and the boss is dead like instantly, because they can't move, except until some of the later bosses, like when you hit them a few times, then they kind of get out of it. But by then, especially using Kylo Ren's stance, their health is already just gone.
Nice. So, I did want to take a quick second, just talk about little Star Wars Jedi. I know it was our big topic of last week, but now that we both beaten it,
still loved it.
I would end on this note. I still think the storyline of number 1 is better, but I think everything else in number 2 is better. So maybe number 3 kind of bridges that gap between all 3 of them. But I did put it on Twitter. I think I'm going to call it now. The next game's going to be called Star Wars Jedi Legacy. And I think that's what. So if it ends up happening, you heard it here first.
That'd be pretty cool. I like 2 more, and I like Cal's
all the way around. 2 more?
Yeah, I like Cal's development more into a gray Jedi versus trying to adhere to, whatever of old, all the old rules. Just kind of letting that stuff go and just figuring it out for yourself.
Gotcha. Guys, so let us know down below in the comments if you've played Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Let us know your thoughts. And, it's just kind of fun to kind of get the rest of that off right here. I feel like this was part 2 of what we were meant to say on last week. So, with that down and out of the way, guys, let's move into our main story, and that is all about Redfall. Redfall has officially come out. It launched on May 2nd, 2023. Developed by Arcane Studios, specifically Arcane Austin. Developed by Bethesda Softworks. Now, this is a game that I was looking forward to a lot, but this is when they were showing this game running at 60 frames a second. The combat and the trailers that they were showing, I thought looked pretty decent. Excuse me.
I want to say at no point did I ever say this game looked good.
Well, I was going to say, because it was mainly the graphics that I thought we both were like, this does look like it needs some polish. And this game was pushed back twice. And I thought that was clearly what they were going to be fixing. But this is not the game that was delivered. And I feel like this is just one more thing that is just cutting deeper into Xbox fans' respect for their development of first-party games, and just a constant letdown of what we're to be expecting out of these exclusives. So I want to ask you, just kind of before we dive into, because what I wanted to do was talk about kind of how we did last time. Just kind of point out all the stuff that's having issues with, just so it's on your guys' radar and you guys know, and then we'll kind of dive into it. And I will point out now, Andrew and I, none of us are farther than 10 hours. I think I was at like 6 something. I think you're at like 4 something hours. And I think that's plenty of time in a game that's not working properly to determine what I like about it and what I don't. But before we keep going, how much more can Xbox do this with? Because there can't be obviously I like this game. I like it a little better than Back 4 Blood, but that's not saying much. How many first-party big games are going to keep coming out that are lackluster? Because I feel like what people aren't talking about is when we get a Hi-Fi Rush. But Hi-Fi Rush is such a different game when you look at how big Redfall was supposed to be. And I think what everyone's kind of nervous about moving forward is, well, now what's going to happen with Starfield? You spent so much money buying Bethesda and all of its teams under it. This game dropped, Starfield. Before we dive into everything that was wrong with it, when's enough's enough, man? Is this the last stumble of their first-party releases, or is this still, halfway through the game?
I think I'm kind of like of 2 minds with this game in the idea that, as far as like the reactions to it, as far as, people are upset, but at the same time, they were trying something new and different versus if they had just done the same game as what they had done before. You know what I mean? You kind of don't.
Let me point out because the two of the big games Arcane was known for specifically that were their big monster hits was doing Dishonored 1 and 2,
right,
and then doing Deathloop, which both games aesthetically are drastically different. Gameplay wise, maybe not incredibly different, but still a different kind of concept. And both are regarded as some of the best games that studio's ever done. I just want to put that in context of try something else. This was something else,
right? And especially too, Deathloop was like something different. That game was people were loving.
PS5 wasn't going to launch shitty on this system,
but you give studios lots of crap for being like, oh, you're pigeonholed. This is all you know how to do, and then when they do something new. And let's say stumble like what they did right now, except for I feel like this is way off the mark of, oh, we missed it just a little bit for trying something new. This is completely off the grid of what that, I guess, appreciate them trying to do something different. I no point, I'm like, especially after playing, I'm like, I don't really get what you were going for, that you ever thought this was a good idea in the first place, because there's so many people who have already done something kind of like this, and done it a lot better, versus...
There's nothing in your game that looked harder than anybody else's, I think we mentioned that 2 episodes back.
And I know we were talking about it the other day, and a lot of people, they're like, oh, well, this was in development before Xbox, so...
Let me just put exactly when that was, because I do have that right in front of me. That was actually, so by the time they purchased, when Microsoft acquired Bethesda, that was in, I believe March of 2021. At this point, this game was already in development from like late 2018 to maybe like mid 2019. So it did have about a couple years before it was even acquired into Microsoft, which is. Okay, keep going, because I was going to ask you a question about
I was going to say, I think you have to take it with the good and the bad, because if this game had came out and been a slam dunk, people went, oh man, Xbox killed it with this one, versus now that it's failure, they're like, oh, is this Xbox's fault? It's like, I don't think you could have taken it one way without having to look at it the other, and this, like you were saying, does put Starfield, unwantingly so, it's up to you, man. You really have to kill it. You really have to do something with this. Otherwise, heads need to roll or something like that. So I think coming with their June event, and then with however Starfield it is, because I already thought Starfield looked rough and what they showed, I'm like, there's just something really interesting. Not for me. It's like, if you're going to have 2 big blunders back to back after this huge purchase, it's like, well, I don't know what you're doing, and I don't know if I really want to go in your direction anymore.
Yeah, because exactly like you're saying, is it Microsoft's fault? Well, maybe good with the bad. If it was awesome, it would have been like, great job. But at the same time, if it's bad, where does the buck stop? Even if you did develop or obtain this thing and it's a couple years into its life cycle, you still got to overlook the rest of this thing. It was still being
and market it.
Yeah, it was still cooking under your guys' oven. After the purchase. So it's like there's QA for this. There's game testers for this. We'll dive into what was wrong in a second, but I know you wanted to touch on this for a second because recently Phil Spencer did just jump on a pretty lengthy size, about maybe 45-hour long interview on Kind of Funny.
Minute?
Did I say minute?
You said hour long. I was like, God dang.
It was 45 minutes and about...
Oh,
yeah, it was 45 minutes.
I thought you meant 45 hour long. I was like,
no, 45 minute to about an hour long interview where he's very transparent. He looks rough. He looks beaten.
For sure.
The guys that picked him apart, I don't think they did so maliciously, but they did have some pretty solid questions that were asking him. So before we dive more into the game, how do you think Phil Spencer took it? I think he took it like a champ, but at the same time, I felt a lot of repeated answers of just being like, it was his fault, but it's still like, how do you separate game launch from technicality issues? So I know you want to touch on that for a minute.
Yeah, I definitely recommend watching it. I at least like.
I'll put the link in the description.
That he took accountability, and I felt like there was a little bit of that like VP talk where you have to be like, oh well, we still believe in this and we still believe in that, but I don't feel like it was as much as like, we dropped the ball, we messed up, especially too with him saying he went out of the way to say like, we showed IGN footage of this running on 60 frames per second, knowing damn well that on console it was only going to be running 30.
Sticker play.
Oh yeah, there ended up being, I think there's pictures floating around. I hadn't seen it because again we got this on Game Pass. That there were stickers, or that there were stickers put on the game. This is like
on physical copies.
On physical copies, saying something about it not having 60 FPS at launch, where because it says it on the box, that's what it should be running on. I'm like, that's insane that that's even something you would even have to do or consider. So I definitely think you should get in there and watch it. Again, I think he did a good part of answering their questions, because I was just really glad that they didn't do those soft-spoken questions like, I understand you're upset. Do you think it's I don't know, something stupid.
What are you going to change about it?
Well, yeah, what are you going to change about it? Well, what's the future hold? And it's like, no, you messed up now. How do you feel about right now? Like,
what do we
you
expect out of next
should
feature
feel
parties?
bad because this game came out and it is not good versus them being like, well, I'm personally enjoying it.
Yeah,
you know, instead of trying to sugarcoat it.
Especially after Tango just did Hi-Fi Rush. You know, another studio that's out of Bethesda, and then Arcane, who everyone has high respect for, at least did drop something like this. So let's get into kind of what was happening. So the main issue that everyone's clearly just stating is that this game is simply not ready to be played. It's just extremely an undercooked game, meaning that, let's see, yeah. So one of the main things that they're looking at is that the map itself is kind of underwhelming for this. It was supposed to be this big open world type game. We haven't beaten it, but when I've been reading, I think there's 2 different map locations that come out, but there's no fidelity in this thing. You can walk around all these different places. The houses don't have any texture. The cars don't have any texture. A lot of people are saying this looks like a 360. It could have been a 360 game, and it still would have looked bad for the system. The other thing is the storyline doesn't seem like it's all the way done yet. One of the main things I was noticing, and it was pretty early on, is the cutscenes are like
I hate those.
These cutscenes that are kind of like almost comic book pagey, where it's like, here's a picture of this, and it's kind of moving on. So not only was it unengaging to watch the story unfold, the story really wasn't anything that was, I guess, blowing people away.
I'm skipping it all. It's not interesting.
I'm skipping it as well. To me, this is a podcast game, unless I'm playing it with somebody. That the missions are very mediocre in terms of their vanilla, the bland. It's the same thing. It's running to a house, turning off a switch, going back, going to another place, finding this box, and finding these things that are kind of hard to see when you're actually looking in the game. You actually got to go over and hover over something. The other thing is, in these missions, there's game-breaking bugs where you can't finish it. So that not only do you have to restart, but your game may be broken at that point. The next one was combat. It's a weak combat cycle for somebody who wants to kind of compete in this circle. What they were kind of comparing to is kind of like a Far Cry, kind of mixed with like a Borderlands, where the gunplay needs to be tight. And Andrew can dive into more than that in a second. Where, I mean, I'm not a big shooter guy. I didn't find it terrible, but by no means was this as tight as a Call of Duty, a Borderlands, a Far Cry.
On that, yeah. I will say that this is the... And I did do it too with the Ghostwire Tokyo, except for Ghostwire Tokyo was far less egregious than this. I had to go on like Reddit or like Google like Reddit, like best controller settings for whatever, and go in and change the settings just so that way I could feel like I could actually aim and shoot in this game. It was that bad. And I had Christina and AJ, I've been playing with 3 people this whole time, and I'm telling them, they're like, oh dude, that's infinitely, it's so much better now.
And you don't send me that link?
Oh, I thought maybe you've had the same idea and figured it out.
What I did in the very beginning, I was playing with, we had a group of 4, and I feel like my guy was constantly running extremely fast, so I was able to turn it down a little bit to where I wasn't over. I mean, I felt like everything was just, looking around and I didn't know what was going on, but so I kind of did that. I don't know, was there anything else in particular you were doing to...
I think there was something...
Because a lot of people were saying, I remember there's a spot that says, if you go over this might drastically change the game and it won't perform as well. I'm like, well, fuck, how much more is this game not going to perform than just changing the settings?
Now, there's a few things that had me do. It had me change like something with like the vision settings, and then as fast as the controller goes, and I think like the dead zone or something like that. And after I changed all that stuff, it still doesn't feel like amazing, but it felt so much better because before I'm like, dude, I feel like I'm all over the place.
Yeah. So and then sticking with the combat is a lot of people aren't like, because if you want to switch your weapons, you have to do it in chronological order of how you have 1, 2, and 3.
So annoying.
Instead of either having a dial that you can instantly just click and go to it, or just making each gun, if there's only 3, making each one a separate button. I know that's a big thing turning people, because I'm fighting some guys, I'm like, okay, I know my number 2 is my power weapon, 1's my sniper, 3 is my other one. It's like, click, click, click. It's like, oh shit, I did it too much. Now I have to click it again. So I know that was turning a lot of people off. And how hard is that to not do?
And I was stupid enough to think if maybe I held Y, it would show up the guns. And I used the stick to pick one of them. Yeah. And what's more annoying too is sometimes, especially towards the beginning, you'll be running 2 of the same gun, and maybe one's better than the other one by a little bit, but if that's all you have and it's got a higher level, so I'm like, well, I don't know which pistol this is because they look the same.
Yeah, so
bland, boring weapon design.
So that was pretty much the main shit with the stuff, with the combat. And then there's all like the technical issues, and this is just a few of them. Obviously, the main one being the 30 frames per second. A lot of people are seeing
I feel like it runs less than that.
Yeah, it feels like it most, because I don't think it's a locked 30 FPS, so I think it's a fluctuating. People are constantly disappearing Enemies, and I ran into this one constantly. Enemies are just freezing or not noticing you, or one notices you and the other one doesn't. So the AI is very poor.
Yeah.
It seems like it doesn't really know what to do, which is unfortunate when you want to make a game that's group combat associated, like focused on, okay, you go left, I go right, you go up the middle, let's set up our traps. And it's really not worth it. It's really just, let me just smash X or the shoot button until this creature is done. There's a lot of textures out of place. There's a lot of pop-in. And that's just a little bit of what we're doing. One of the other big complaints was multiplayer progression, to where, so if you're playing on the same mission and once somebody drops out, they have to now either restart the game or just wait and jump back in with you. So
it only goes off the host.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out that's a lot of stuff. We pointed out last week that Star Wars had a lot of things wrong with it, but not in a way that this is. And even if it was just...
I'm sure EA is glad this game came out right after Star Wars.
Even if it was just technical issues, this game has so many other things that just... at the bottom line, what I have here, it's just clearly not done. So let me read this one thing, Andrew, and you can dive kind of more into it. And this comes to us from thegamer.com. They write, let's see. I don't think there's much hope for Redfall. From the limited parts I've played, it's even worse than Forspoken. If this release during a busy time was damage control to let audience move on, then it makes sense to hold this position. Underneath the technical flaws, which will be fixed in time, the game lacks the edge where we've come to expect from Arcane. Some enthusiasts have found it in analyzing level design, layout, or buried in flavor text, but the game is a pale imitation of a genre that is already dead. It leans into co-op in ways that make the solo experience worse and which blunts Arcane's experience. Mostly it feels like Redfall has been released now because there was never a good time to release a game like this, and conversely, the worst time might be the best time. We're too busy with Star Wars and Zelda to notice that Xbox's prestige exclusive for the year is a dud. Starfield, Forza, and Hellblade can still make 2023 a good year for Xbox, but it's off to a bad start. The only good to come of this is a lot of people might not notice. So that's one of the things, maybe that's why they dropped it so fast, is that, you're just going to wait 6 months and play it. But then you've got to know that places like IGN, even small outlets like us, we're going to cover it. Our job is to put this kind of on people's radar. So I don't know, dissect how you ever want to dissect or chime in what you want to add on.
I completely agree. I almost feel like that was their, there's no saving this game. Let's just put it out and get it out. Because again, like you were saying, I don't even think it's so much this game runs like hell. It's got a lot of problems, and it goes beyond that. I think it's a design philosophy issue too, because at no point I'm like, I don't really get about what this game is supposed to be. I'm having fun because I'm playing with two other people that I enjoy talking to a lot, and we're just talking shit about the game the whole time, right. Or we're just trying to mess each other up as we're playing, or stealing each other's kills, or we're just messing around the whole time. So that's what's fun about it. But that's us creating our own fun out of something that's terrible. I don't think that there's any saving this game. I personally don't know.
You don't think in 6 months there's any way they make a patch that just builds in?
I don't know what they could do. Right. I honestly don't know, because it's not just that it runs bad. It's just that it's not fun.
There's nothing there. There's no meat. There's no meat with those potatoes.
And so I was almost wondering. I'm like, you know what? And again, this is why I do say you stick it to Microsoft too, because they heavily marketed this game and pushed this game. How many different things did we have to see? Watch this game. Look how good it looks. And this
Redfall was on every Microsoft showcase.
And so that's why I do blame Microsoft for this too. It's not just Arcane. Phil does have something to answer for that. But again, it's just, at what point, I wonder where they're like, you know what? It is what it is. We messed this game up. Let's just put it out, support it for a little bit, kill it, and then hopefully we'll get them with the next one.
I did want to point out, because this game recently dropped to Steam's. They finally made a bottom 15 games of all time in terms of what.
And it's rated on there, yeah. I saw that.
14 with an average of 2.83 rating, so it's dead on PC as well. The only
Deadfall.
The only thing I wanted to point out was that when you look at games like that were non-playable when they first came out, at least to a lot of people, and I'd argue a lot of this had to do with last gen. Cyberpunk came out at a 4 out of 10. No Man's Sky came out of a 4.8 out of, I believe they had a 10 cycle. Fallout on Metacritic had a 53, where Redfall is still above a Fallout 76 on its Metacritic that's in the low 60s, and it's on par being a 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10 on a lot of outlets between Cyberpunk and No Man's Sky. But I think you've already answered that question. So you don't think there's any way, if a lot of those games came back, and a lot of those were tough to look at and they got ripped apart, this game, is doing a little better than some of the other games that we know have come back and been successful.
Besides No Man's Sky, I don't think that Fallout or Cyberpunk had bad design philosophy.
Right,
it was
okay,
just the execution.
I like you pointed that out earlier. Yeah.
Is the thing, like, that had good fundamental, and again, that's just if you played it on last gen. We played it on Series X. We didn't have any problems with Cyberpunk. But even if we had played it on the last one, it's still a good idea. It's still a good game to play with what you're doing when it does work. It wasn't bad design philosophy. It was just poor execution. This is just bad all around.
Now, is there? I mean, I wanted to kind of end maybe.
So
go ahead.
The other thing I can think of along those lines is like grounded, or even what's the other one that she plays all the time? Or no, that's Grounded.
Yeah.
Grounded, and then Sea of Thieves both launched and obviously like weren't lauded for being amazing. And over time, now people love those games, but that's just because it was lacking content.
Well, and they launched as previews. They didn't launch as fully baked $70 games.
But the design philosophy and the idea was there, like, this is a good idea. There's just not enough here at this time. And now people love those games because they just needed more to do. Even if you gave me more to do with it, I wouldn't know what to do with it.
Yeah. And so, is there any note you could add on at the end? Is there any goodness out of this game? Is there any note? Because I wrote down a couple things. I do like the characters of them. Not personally, not the way they're written, not the way they're acted. I do like some of the way they perform. I like their abilities. I
don't even use my abilities ever.
I was gonna say you can see a little bit of the arcane DNA in that aspect, because my dude. So I was playing the chick with Geno and them, but I started my own guy, which is he's like the reporter guy. He's the guy that's trying to find all this stuff.
It's like Mohinder or
something.
So,
but he's got this cool spear that when he throws it, it'll launch into them, and then you can upgrade it to do like an EMP or a burst, so it'll slow people down. His other one, and I didn't think I was going to use it a lot, because I'm like, what am I going to do with this? But I've been finding if I want to get on roofs to go do stuff, he can throw a box up there, and he can transport himself up there, and then eventually he can do it with the group. I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool, because I am using it in missions. And his last one, and I use it in all boss fights, is he throws down this big spike, which is a huge like UV EMP blast that goes for like maybe 8 seconds to cook all the enemies. So I'm like, I do like that, but I don't know if that's not enough, because the only thing I say is, and we kind of did it earlier, the combat, I don't hate it, but I don't love it. The story is the only thing, you got to play this game with friends. I've been playing it solo. You just can't. So my only interesting note is that the character's okay.
I'll tell you how I use my ability, and I hate my character. I hate looking at him.
I don't know who you're playing. The other dude? The eye?
Yeah, I hate looking at it. Jacob Boyer. I think it's like Dead Eyes, what they call him, or something like that. But the only ability I really use, because he goes invisible, but again, the AI is broken at the time. They either see you or they don't. Anyway. So it doesn't matter. He has another gun, but it's like a spirit gun, but you down things so fast, or the AI is broken, that it doesn't even matter. So the only one that I use is he has a Raven that helps you to, like, you throw it out there and it marks where enemies are with like a red triangle over their head. I use that because the objective will be kill the vampire, kill this guy, kill whatever. I cannot find him because he's warped into some shitty area, or again, the way the game works, he's aggro to you. He knows you're there, but he's not attacking you like he's supposed to. So I don't know where the hell he is. So I use my Sparrow or Raven, and I'm like, oh, okay, there he is. And then we'll go find him and kill him. So that's it. I'm like, dude, I hate this even more.
God. So yeah, I would just say, skip this game unless you, experience for yourself just so you can know what everyone's talking about. But if you are going to play it, try to rope a couple buddies in, because it's just boring.
We're committed to beating it. I'll give you that.
It sucks to play with a group of people. It sucks more to play by yourself. So if you've got the guts to do it, try it out. I was asking you, but you got a nice group going. I'm playing with Geno, so we play here and there. I'm like, I don't know if I'm even going to put more time into this. There's so much more to play. I would say this game is 100% skippable. Maybe in 6 months if they can do something to it. But like Andrew's saying, what is it that you really... you could patch it and make it 60 FPS. Are you going to add cutscenes? Are you going to change the storyline? Are you going to... Even the guns, there's different varieties, but there's not enough between the guns that really make a difference in themselves, besides things being like, 25% more accuracy. Okay, but accuracy's dog shit. So like, what's it really doing? So I say it sucks that this was because I was really looking forward to it. It sucks that this is what we got, and this puts a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. And dude, I'd argue if you don't have Game Pass, I wouldn't day one pre-order Starfield. I wouldn't, you know what I mean? If you're gonna buy it a la carte, I'd maybe wait a week or two and hear the reviews on that, because that's the next one we're all waiting on.
I would just say that I never really thought this game looked good. You've heard me talk about it before badly.
Not so much good. I always thought it looked fun.
I thought that this game came out worse than I thought it could be, and I didn't know that was possible.
That was a low swinging bar.
But they got me.
Nice. So leave us down your thoughts below, guys, of how you think Redfall is. If you've been playing it, if you've been hearing about it, let us know your thoughts. So with that then out of the way, guys, let's move into questions of the week. Now, guys, if you want to submit a question that Andrew and I can answer on the show, you can do so a couple of different ways. You can leave it in the YouTube comment section down below. We can grab it there. You can email us at lastcallproductions@gmail.com, or you can find me at Craig Perales on any of the social medias, and I'll be happy to take your comment there. So the first question comes from Jason Gomez, and they write, Xbox may be in more trouble, boys. I keep seeing these rumors pop up on Twitter about Konami giving some exclusives to the PlayStation, and they will reveal them at the next PlayStation showcase. Thoughts on what it is or could be? Yeah, so I wanted to pull this up because I was looking at a lot of different things on Twitter as well, especially today, and what I was reading, and this comes to us from, what would you call that? Would you just call that gaming sacred symbols, or would you actually call out the triangle, the circle, the X, the square? Anyway, gaming symbols. And it says, according to journalist Jez Corden, he heard from his sources that Sony has entered into an agreement with Konami to limit Metal Gear, Silent Hill, and possibly Castlevania to the PlayStation, which is gnarly. And the more I keep seeing these rumors, it just, even if it's not all three, it seems like there's definitely going to be at least one of them, and my bet would probably be, if it's any of them, a remake of Metal Gear Solid 3. Now, the showcase itself, I've been seeing a lot of different dates, and maybe as of this recording, they've nailed the date, but I know I've been seeing a lot of May 25th, which I know Andrew saw a lot of, but I've also seen June 11th, but clearly this is taking place during what would have been its big showcase during E3, and boy, oh boy, man, what a heavy hitter that type of news would be. I mean, imagine if there wasn't E3 that year and Sony was still a part of it, and that's what they walked on stage and seen. So, excitement-wise, awesome. In terms of, I don't want to call it gatekeeping, but it seems like Sony's really just trying to reconnect with its Japanese audience, because I wanted to point out, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, is that there hasn't, a lot of their IPs remained dormant. Castlevania, they haven't made one since 2010. So it's like, okay, if no one's going to make one, can we because obviously they're licensing these games out. They're not buying Konami, so let's make that clear. They're not buying Konami. They're not absorbing them, but it seems like they're going to be licensing these games, or at least in some deal to keep it. We can keep using the term timed exclusive, but I feel like that's out the gate.
After what happened with 7,
it's exclusive. But my other question, and I want to kind of, maybe you can start here and move backwards, is I rewatched a lot of those Silent Hill trailers, the new ones, Ascension, F, and Townfall, because when I first was reading that, I'm like, oh, maybe they just made like a Silent Hill like 1 and 2, because obviously Blue Point's got to be working on something, and a lot of people think this is it. But when I rewatched all those trailers, I didn't see any Xbox stuff on them. I didn't see any Sony stuff on them either. But I don't know. Walk me through it. What do you think? I know you're a Konami guy.
I know, and this is kind of what pissed me off the most, especially too because Castlevania hasn't had anything relevant besides the Netflix anime that absolutely killed it.
Fire. And
Metal Gear hasn't done anything since 5. What was the one that came out after that? Metal Gear Survive. It was like a zombie game that nobody wanted because it was after the whole Kojima fiasco. I do want to note the only big thing of importance to happen to Xbox, because they didn't get Metal Gear Solid 4, and then when they did the collection, it also didn't have Metal Gear Solid 1. They did get 2, 3, and Peace Walker on the HD remaster, and then Zeros. And 5 actually premiered, I believe, for the first time at the Xbox event. So that was actually pretty cool to be like, okay, cool, that's cool to see Konami being open and working with someone else, because that's something I would have figured would show up at a Sony event. But seeing this, I'm like, dude, this is what pissed me off more, is that Xbox, again, with these other games that aren't doing good, here's another blow, because now you're over here chasing Call of Duty, which is going to be on everything anyway. Sony never would have gone out of the way to buy them. But why aren't you making deals like this to get these games, like Final Fantasy, Castlevania, Metal Gear? Why aren't you ensuring, if you want to ensure that gamers get to play games and games come first for your community, then why do we keep losing out on deals like this? Because there's no way that you weren't aware of something, or that you couldn't make a counter offer or do something. And this further bolsters my belief that I've said before, that the only reason Xbox is chasing Call of Duty is to hold that as their bargaining chip for don't make any more deals like this, otherwise you're not going to have Call of Duty. Yeah. That's the only thing that makes sense in my mind to stop anything like this.
Yeah, because it seems like they want to, I mean, and here's the weird thing. If that deal doesn't go through, then not only do they lose this big bargaining chip,
plus a ton of money,
but Sony's been making smart deals on the side, going, okay, well, if you guys want to do that, you can't have Final Fantasy 16, you can't have all these big squares off, and now we're going to take, let's see, Silent Hill, Metal Gear Solid, Castlevania. It's like, those were the smart plays. I didn't even really think about it. I'm 100% with you. Why do you keep going after this big cheese when it should just be more things that make your content, or at least your platform, your ecosystem, more engaging to be in? Because if Metal Gear stopped coming, let's say the next big one doesn't come to Xbox, I mean, we talked about it last week, are you leaning more to getting a PS5, like how I do, just for the exclusives? Because those are a lot of big ones, especially with Silent Hill having 3 games coming out, especially Castlevania. You know that if Sony's...
I'm a huge Castlevania fan.
I mean, well, let me ask you this too, because I was going to say, because a lot of people are saying Blue Points, that's what they've been working on. That's what they've been doing on these Konami games. And I just want to, if no one's familiar with Blue Point, is they actually do a lot of remakes already. And some of the big ones are the God of War collection, the Ico and Shadow of the Colossus collection, Metal Gear Solid HD collection, Uncharted the Nathan Drake collection, Gravity Rush Remastered,
Their
Shadow of the
biggest
Colossus,
one is going to be that last one.
Demon's Souls, which was a huge PS5 game.
I would say that was the first next-gen game.
Yeah, I believe it was. And then support teams, they were on Titanfall and God of War Ragnarok. So, do you think that is what they've been working on silently and behind closed doors? Is this whole kind of Konami remasters and things like that? Maybe MGS3
It could have been, because that makes sense, and that Konami doesn't take the risk of, okay, like, you know, we're in development hell and now we're wasting all these resources.
And I don't know, so buying PS5? Step it up to the plate like the rest of us?
I would have to. I would have to at that point, and honestly, I would maybe have to get like one of those Xbox converter controllers or something like that, and who knows, maybe that would even be my primary console, because again, the only reason it's just so annoying to talk about, and then it makes me even more mad that, again, if that acquisition doesn't go through, they still have to pay a ton of money to all this other stuff that is promised out, that could have gone towards, hey, you know what, please keep this on our console. We'll pay whatever you think the difference is going to be. Just make sure Metal Gear, make sure whoever these other games are going to be on our console. And it's like, no, you're...
Yeah, it's gnarly stuff, and I'm sure... you know, by the time the showcase comes, which is fairly soon, it'll be by next month, we should have a better understanding of what's happening. But again, man, not a good day for Microsoft with a weak first party, now knowing that future exclusives are going to be going to Sony. And not just random ones, man, good ones, good IP that people have faith and have, you know, the gaming stock into. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Microsoft does if they don't acquire Activision. So thank you for the question. And the final question comes from a question we had a few weeks ago, but I completely forgot to grab it, from Divine Anchor. And they write... do you guys have a game you personally think is underrated or looked over that deserves more love? So before we dive into it, Andrew and I had a conversation off camera about this, and I think we kind of look at it in completely different ways. So, Andrew, what's your game that you think has been overlooked or maybe needs a little more love and attention?
I went not so much fan base, but from like developer publisher based. I actually put Alien Isolation. That came out October 7th, 2014 from Gearbox. Now, that game when it came out got a 5.9 from IGN, which I don't agree with. I didn't actually get the game at the time, and I don't think a lot of people did, because there's kind of a little bad word of mouth about it. Mostly just that it was too long, and I think the biggest thing too was when you booted up that game, it says, hey, this is the preferred difficulty, which is hardcore, which was actually really hard. You should have just started on normal, so I think maybe that put a lot of reviewers off too. But later on, if you look up any sort of Reddit, look up anyone who's played it, look up anyone who's talked about it, I've gushed about it, that is the best thing to happen to the Alien franchise. It was so good. It was a beautiful game. It was done so well, looked just like what I would picture Alien to be. It was an amazing story, and I do think it went on a little too long, but when games are too short these days, it went on too long because it's a horror game. If this was any other kind of game where you actually are fighting back and doing things versus this is survival horror, you're hiding from the alien, you're not trying to engage it, there's other survivors, you're trying to outsmart it, so that could have gone on a little too long. I think it's about 20 hours, where 15 to 12 I think would have been the sweet spot for it. I think it would have fared off much better, and we haven't heard anything else about it.
They're making Fire Team and
yeah, these other ones that aren't even close to doing. This was someone who took so much love from that IP and poured it into this game, and it showed. And retroactively, if you look at it, I don't know what it's on sales wise, but any forum, anyone that talks about this game absolutely gushes about how good it is and what it did for the IP. And there's no sequel. There's been no talks of a sequel. And I think that this is something that, again, Sega and everyone look past. This is something that deserves a second chance. Make it a little bit shorter. Fix that difficulty on it. Because that was really, I felt like, kind of the only negatives. And I think it's Ryan McCaffrey that, it is Ryan McCaffrey that had reviewed it. And I followed him forever. I don't know so much. I've never really heard him gush about horror games. Because when he's talking about it, he's like, oh, you can only do so much. I'm like, well, yeah, that kind of is what you do in a horror game. If you're fighting, when you watch
survival horror.
Yeah, when you watch the movie Alien, they're not engaging the alien. And the alien's not there the whole time. Same like Jaws. You know, that's what makes it suspenseful. That's what makes it so good that there is plenty of else to go there. So again, I don't know what if he's really his big horror background is. That I was like, oh, you know, maybe sometimes it's not the right person that gets to review the game.
I've always thought about that too, because sometimes like, oh, this guy gives it a 10. What would 5 other people in that room have given a game? You know, if this person gives it a 5 too, what would 5 other horror fans, you know, give him that game? So yeah, sometimes I'm with you on that.
And not that he's not qualified to talk about it. He's obviously a legend on that side of things. He does. I hear him gush about, you know, Halo, sports games, Forza. So I always wondered more if that was his wheelhouse, and maybe he's not the biggest horror fan and he was the person who got to do that. But what is yours?
The game I ended up picking was Mass Effect Andromeda. Came out in 2017.
Ooh, I played for like 20 minutes.
A lot of people beat this thing up though, and let me just read this real quick, and this is kind of what they said. Some have pointed to the lackluster writing and characterization, while others have criticized the game's glitches and graphics. It is possible that Mass Effect Andromeda simply didn't live up to the fans' high expectations after the critically acclaimed Mass Effect trilogy, and I honestly think that's what it was. Yeah, this game came out with some bugs, and every game does these days with a couple of things. I mean, that doesn't stop it from being great. Even if you're going to say the characterization is lackluster, if you're comparing it to one of the greatest trilogies of all time, even if it's a little less, you're going to say it's drastically worse. Right. So I think what a lot of people did, I think the second half of that sentence explains it. It wasn't up to what the original trilogy, considered one of the best made trilogies and gameplay of all time, did. But I agree with that. When I look back at some of the scores, Steam gave it a 7 out of 10. Most video users 76%, IGN 7.7, Metacritic 71. That's a decent game. It's not a mind-blowing game. It's not a great game. It's a decent game. Compare it to what we're looking at now. Compare it to a Redfall when it came out. I feel like when Mass Effect Andromeda came out, it got massacred the same way Redfall's getting massacred now. And if we look at it in retrospect, those are two completely different things. And one is just, it wasn't as good as one of the best-selling franchises of all time. So I'd argue, because I said the combat I thought was better when I played that game. Once you had the jetpack and you already knew the powers, I felt when you started making your guy, you could instantly start diving into how you wanted to play the game. It had some cool characters. I thought it had a pretty decent storyline. Again, is it the best? No, but I think a lot of people completely skipped it because of all the harsh word of mouth it has. And like I'm saying, if you look at what we're up to now, you know, Andrew's looking at finishing Redfall. Would you ever go back and play Mass Effect Andromeda just because of 20 minutes that you played, you know, 8 years ago? So I think that'd be a game that, because I played it, I don't mean to cut you short, but me and Denny, I know, he beat it. And we had a conversation. We sat down over beers and we were like, he's like, what's it? Because then he doesn't dive into the news, how we report it. And he's like, what's everybody's problem with this game? I'm like, exactly. So I'd argue that's a game that a lot of people just never even gave a chance because it was compared to one of the greatest games of all time.
And I do remember that. I didn't play it 20. I played it like 2 hours. I remember my big thing was I was like, it's just throwing so much at me right now that I don't want to learn this. Almost kind of like, I don't know. Again, it was just so much.
Dragon Age Inquisition was kind of like that.
I was like, I just don't want to do this, and so I'm just not going to. But I do remember at the time, everyone talking about it. I don't even remember it scoring that high, but I don't know, this game is trash, garbage. Yeah. All the videos about how broken it is, and this and that, and having the stupid facial anime, and all this weird stuff, and Redfall's way worse than that.
Dude,
that's completely great. That's two completely very different scores, very different games.
I'd argue Star Wars Jedi Survivor has more problems on it when it came out than this, and it got a 9.
And yeah, I do remember the talk about that game. Garbage, trash. Yeah. And again, I had only played it for a little bit. I'd seen a little bit of it, but I had always felt more like it was people trying to expect it to live up to those original 3. It just had too big of shoes to fill, or people's expectations were just way too high.
Yeah,
and I felt more like that's what it was.
I'd say if you got that new remastered trilogy and you want a little more Mass Effect, it's on the Game Pass if you combine it with the EA, but it's probably $20. If you are looking for more, I would say give it a chance, because that game severely got punished. It's like Titanfall 2. That might have been a good one too. Titanfall 2. That game is a masterpiece that nobody talks about. But that is kind of the end of our point. So guys, that is the end of episode 168. Guys, join us next time on episode 169, dude. So until next time, my name is Craig Perales. That handsome fellow was Manager Montemare. Cheers.
Here's to you, Phil.